It is 8:33, and welcome to the final lecture for this quarter for this class, Introduction to Corrections. I'm Professor Richard Wright, and so yes, there is no lecture in week 6. We talked about that before, and so at the end, I'm going to talk about week 6. And so let's go ahead and let me share my screen with you. Okay, all this information you're familiar with. Rubrics, of course, are in each assignment. We're going to talk about that. And you can see from here the week 5 lecture. And tonight I will, well, not tonight, but really by tomorrow, I will have this lecture placed in there. Okay. All right. So now let's take a look at week 5 announcement. Okay. So week 5 announcement. Um, in this week, challenges within the field of corrections. We'll be dealing with that. I sent you previously well, you had the PowerPoints for chapter 7, but I sent them to you again, chapters 13, 15, and 16. And then we'll talk a little bit about the challenges and corrections, TPC review, and vocabulary review. Then remind you about the discussion assignment, sensible revocation. Initial post was due last night, and your reply post is due Saturday night, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Finally, complete the written assignment, release planning, and then, of course, the quiz. You know how that works. You get your 3 tries at it, and before uh, Sunday. Then you know about my motto. Okay, so let's now take a look at course tools and see the course calendar. You should be aware of this, that this lecture is the final one, and that your course assignments, initial post, as I said, it was due yesterday the 5th, reply post Saturday, and then Sunday, your written assignment and the quiz. And then, of course, I was told not to extend the date, but I'm extending the date and time because you're not going to have access to the video until tomorrow, maybe even tomorrow evening, which means that some people won't see it until Friday. So anyway, you know how I operate as far as getting that phrase in. Those of you who are here in the lecture, you can, of course, have an advantage. But be aware that the course absolutely ends the 12th, midnight, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. The course will be over. Okay, so that's why I say I'll talk about week 6 information as well tonight. So you're aware, reminding you, the 12th is it. So you got less than a week before this course is over. So now let's take a look at the assignments for this week. Sensible revocation, you have 2 scenarios that you're going to operate on, and it says that ask the question, what is sensible revocation? Provide that, dealing with the situations with Chris and with Pat. In your initial, suppose select one of these scenarios. One, okay, not two. And then provide the following details of these 3 bullet points. In your response, choose a peer who selected the other scenario. And then you will respond according to the bullet points here. Your written assignment, release planning, and you're going to operate with this scenario. Okay, you create a proposal that includes identify 2 recommendations for this state, including specific examples for each recommendation. Why you think the recommendations would be the most impactful, and then explain how each recommendation is aligned with your research, including RNR, TPC, and any other principles we'll touch on. Supply evidence from credible sources. I've said this all along. I keep saying it every week, and people still continue not to do it. Citations in the body and some references at the end. And provide adequate credible sources. And then make sure the grammar and all that's correct. So let's take a look at the rubric, which you should be familiar with how it works. Again, notice what I said. If you do emerging, to get emerging, that means you don't have any examples or recommendations, and you don't have the citations, missing supporting details from credible sources. There it is again. And then, of course, your spelling and grammar. Notice, though, here, to get to the next one, you're going to have minimal information. So you want to get as close to this as you can. Remember again, I said to you, pretend that these 3 don't exist and operate on the basis of what it says here. And ask yourself, did you provide an exemplary explanation of why the 2 identified recommendations would be the most impactful? And provide examples for each recommendation to clarify. Make sure you have thorough alignment of the 2 recommendations made to RNR TPC. Okay. Does anybody know what RNR stands for? See if you did some reading. What does RNR stand for? Nobody? TPC? Neither one of those? Okay. Nobody's saying anything. So I guess nobody knows what RNR and TPC. That means then that you probably by now have not looked at the PowerPoints or the materials that I sent you. All right, so you want to get on that because that's going to be part of your assignment. We'll talk a little bit about it. And then the 5 points for that. So just remember that. Okay, somebody says, oh, I didn't know about that. Okay, so you're going to deal with this scenario. Does anybody now know what TPC stands for? Okay, RNR. What about TPC? We're talking about the topic of release planning this week. It has to do with release planning. It's right here in front of you. Can you guys see my screen? Yeah. So what's the answer? Okay. Come on, guys. I don't know if you're tired or what, but yes, yes. But you both have it. Risk, need, responsibility, and then transition from prison to community. That's what it means. And there's a model. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Okay. I just asked if you knew. All right. Let me get this out of the way. So any questions about the written assignment? Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? Okay. If you do, be sure to ask them. All right. I guarantee you, I always get a barrage of questions from students. I already got one already earlier. All right. So now you know what you need to do for that. And then, of course, the other thing that you got is the infamous quiz that you'll have 30 minutes and you'll have 3 opportunities to get the grades. Okay. All right. And then, of course, your live classroom, we'll talk about that. So, you're terrible at quizzes. It's all right. Better get into that. But see, here you get 3 chances at it. Yeah. Well, that's what people make mistakes. You should be aware that whenever you take a quiz, particularly when it's multiple choice, there are usually 2 that don't fit at all. And you should know what those 2 are. Then the next 2, and don't overanalyze. And if you come to the conclusion to the one, stay with it. Don't go back and change it. That's one of the philosophies. But the first philosophy is there are 2 that are not there. And you know what those 2 would be, eliminate those. And then you'll have a 50-50 chance of getting the correct answer. But if you've done your studying and listened to the lectures and looked at the material in the module, used the PowerPoints, I promise you, you'll do well with the quiz. All right, so those are the assignments. So now let's get into the lesson itself. So we're going to deal with challenges. We're going to deal with the challenges and correction, of course, and the TPC review, okay? Which you all know what it stands for, okay? All right, you know what it stands for. Transportation, just think about from prison to community. All right, that's what's going to happen. And then a little vocabulary review. And then we're not going to go with it. Then we're going to jump into week 6, which is not really, you'll see when we get there. You'll see why I said that. So let's talk about some challenges. Let's get this out of the way. So when you are operating in corrections, um, there are many challenges. There are challenges that come about because you're trying to satisfy these 2 primary goals: public safety and then offender client success. So public safety, the first one, is when you've protected not just the inmates, but also visitors, but also um, the your colleagues who work in there. And so we're aware of the fact that recidivism is like the system that operates pretty much through most prisons, uh, or either extensions of recidivism. When I say that, I mean from the standpoint recidivism involves somebody getting out, coming back getting out there, do another crime, come back in, or either, like I said, they'll lose their ability parole because they catch a case while they're out. That's the term we use, which means they get charged with another case, or probation is revoked, and so they get released, and then it keeps going round and around and round. And then the other aspect of it is the fact that you start to see generational recidivism. And when I say that, it'll start with the people that you release, and then someone will come in, and they're close to even their children, uncles, nieces, nephews, you know, um, others that are involved in in-laws that become involved, and so it really creates a situation where the staff is overwhelmed because the numbers keep getting bigger, and the budgets for many state and county organizations that run the jails and the prisons are strained or stretched. It's like a rubber band, and you can see it getting thinner and thinner and thinner till eventually it might pop. However, with all of that being said, that it is important to remember that um, if you don't have programs implemented to help individuals, we've talked about this already, then we will continue with the revolving door aspect, such as alcoholism, and drugs. Drugs are a humongous drugs, alcohol. What's the third one? That's huge. Anybody know? Well, no, it all results in violence. But what? No. What's the third one? How about mental health? How about that? Mental health, alcoholism, drug use. Actually, it's mental health combined with some of those sometimes, and you have a double whammy situation. And so, what you want to do is provide adequate programming and services for the inmates, who are called clients, to try to turn them around. Uh, Education, I said, is also one of the benefactors of society. Trades, giving individuals the ability, like people learn how to cut hair, people learn how to work on computers, people learn how to work on vehicles, uh, and and it goes on and on and on. But the key thing is, just remember, you can give education, vocations, trades, but if a person has a drug or an alcohol problem, or there's a mental illness that is not being adequately treated, it don't mean a thing. It does not mean a thing, because you didn't get to the heart of what the problem is. So those are just some of the challenges. But keep in mind the three that I'm talking about here. All right. So it says that the criminal justice system's task today is to define and implement sensible revocation, um, such as determine what behaviors threaten public safety and require return to prison, eliminating or delaying successful reintegration, where our goal is to get individuals so that they, um, how should I say, the prison life they adapted to, we hope they'll leave that behind those walls. So, so let's look at a little bit of this before we get to TPC, is challenges in corrections. Look a little bit at this. So I know you can't hear it. So you're going to have to listen to it, and so you're going to pretty much follow what I say when we start to talk about some of those. Um, so, so then basically, I'm pausing it to deal with, first of all, in one of these four categories, jail administration. So that deals with overcrowding, the multiple lawsuits that are brought by individuals, which we've discussed in previous weeks, and then the training that the individuals who are correction officers today, and also assisting in that, I would add too, is not just the staff training, but the education that many correction officers are now obtaining by going to college, just like uh, Bryce here in this class has been in a year, but he sees the light at the end of the tunnel, and he sees the future and the direction that that the process is going to be able to have a bright future in working in staff, particularly in uh, as a corrections officer. You're going to need uh, more education than a high school diploma. And sure, you'll learn on the job, but when you learn methods that will deal with the issues that we've talked about, those three, the drugs, the alcohol, and then the mental illness. So these are issues that jail administrators face: overcrowding, multiple lawsuits, but again, that's helped um, by the law to minimize the rights of individuals to file suits. And see, what you don't understand is unless you've been involved with the system, that like I was as a lawyer, I didn't deal so much with prisoners dealing with it, but I dealt with people in jail awaiting trial. They have what they call jailhouse lawyers, and these individuals will usually get individuals to file motions, handwritten. Sometimes now they're able to type them and get them to use computers, but they are really motions that they take out of context and understanding of what the law is and flood the system with that. And then you have cases like 1981 lawsuits or the civil rights lawsuits that are filed. And so the bottom line now is an exhausting of the administrative remedies is one of the requirements that's necessary. And so, but overcrowding, that goes with what I talked about earlier. Prison administration is led by the warden, the person who is in charge of the facility, and the organizational structure is where it falls down to different levels. For example, there are inmates who have different rank. Uh, the way it is here in Illinois is if you become a major, you've gone to the top. Then under that, you will have I believe it's a captain, and then lieutenant under that. And so the point of the matter is it follows the same kind of administration that law enforcement does as well. But the key thing is that, once again, the goal of the administration is to deal with the SSR, or the safety, as I spoke to earlier, the security of the facility in itself, maintaining control. There are many riots that take place on a constant daily basis in these facilities. And then ultimately to prepare individuals. Okay, you just gave it. Yeah, corporal. I forgot about that. Those we call those non-coms, but let's go back to it. Pick it up here. So that's the way it is. Yeah, you have warden, major, captain, lieutenant. Yeah, I stopped there. But yeah, non-commissioned, just like in the military, you have a sergeant and corporals as well. So basically, that's That's their ranking, all the way up to the warden. And yeah, sergeants are non-coms. That's the way it is in the military as well. And so I knew that. But when you're commissioned, and so here's the point: is that the higher you go up in rank, the greater your responsibility is in terms of the facility as well. Did you not know that um, majors will take over the facility, and if the warden is not around? One of my students has done that many times with Stateville Prison, that's near where we are, in where I am. So anyway, that's the administration. Offender release and barriers: prepare individuals for release. And so what we want to do is from day one, that a person arrives through I forgot the term that's used, but it's like introduction, processing. Uh, I know the term, and I'm drawing a blank on it because one of my students shared it with me, but it varies. Well, okay, you guys call it admissions, but there's another term that we use here in Illinois, but it's the same thing. The key thing is that you go through processing. Okay, that's processing is what we're talking about. So through processing, you end up getting your fingerprints, your pictures taken, and everything else. You find out about that individual's uh, wants and needs as much as possible. You begin to send that individual to a facility based upon the offense that they committed, whether it's a max, super max, minimum security, and or so forth. And that's what we're talking about when we get to the prison aspects of it. But anyway, the point of the matter is that what I'm saying is from day one, you're starting to prepare that person for release. And every day, the goal ought to be to get that person closer to release. Now, you do know, and I know, that in order to keep release moving in a consistent fashion to decrease recidivism, you're going to be dealing with the situations where you are addressing the heart, the core issue. And yep, reception or diagnostic units. And the purpose for those, especially the diagnostic unit, is to find out what the needs are for that individual who is incarcerated. So um, definitely, definitely. So then, um, lack of services or assistance. The key thing is that those are problems that individuals run into because of the budgetary restraints. But I am totally, totally of a belief that you need to deal with the mental health of individuals and the other two that I talked about, particularly the drug issue, because they go hand in hand. So, yep. So you gotta. Here's the deal. You gotta have provide, and actually, whether you guys realize it or not, if you become a corrections officer, you're really a servant of the inmate. Did you not know that? I mean, that's the actual mindset that you have. Now, that doesn't mean that you grant their every wish. No, what you do is you recognize that they don't make good decisions anyway. So you utilize the process of providing the services that are needing. Uh, it's a push-pull situation. I totally agree with that. And it's a balance. It's a balance that takes place, and so it's necessary. Then you deal with whatever the conditions of release are. And those are generally determined in situations from prison by a parole board or some agency like that that provides what the individual needs are to continue to keep them um, with the ability to reintegrate into the community and to society. And then finally, the section here dealing with what probation and parole officers deal with. And remember the difference in the two. Probation is when you don't go to jail and you end up getting a chance to serve your time outside of jail. Parole is when you have gone in and served a good portion of your time, but based upon a determination of how you operated or while you were in the facility, that you should be given the opportunity to reintegrate into the community to finish up your time. And so the challenge is that both of these individuals, parole officer and probation officers, face is dealing with what we call uh, VOPs. And VOP stands for violation of whatever P is. P could be probation or parole based upon the situations. And you should be aware of the fact that those decisions are generally made at the level where the goal of the probation officer and parole board is not to try to get you back in there, to lock you back up, unless you really, have stretched it or gone too far with what you've done. And so, but the whole balance is to try to monitor you and both of those individuals to make sure that you're complying with the requirements or conditions of release, and then also making sure that you're staying out of trouble um, with future actions. And so anyway, uh, use discretion, as it says, for success. So this I'm going to be probably moving pretty fast through this because of the fact that I've already talked about this. So as we already know, overcrowding is an issue. You got special populations that we've discussed in previous weeks. You're dealing with the issue of gender. One of the growing populations in prisons today are females, and now you have the transgender issue as well, which is more. It's been around a while, but it's more prevalent now. So you got the special populations that you have to make sure that you treat them a little differently based upon who they are, whether they're older individuals or whether they're female. You have individuals who are gay and straight. You want to make sure that you provide for the needs for those individuals. And then, yeah, special needs for individuals who have um, problems such as um, maybe you have PSTD, PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Did you not know a lot of military people who have PTSD end up in prison? I'm sure Rice knows that. And one of the reasons why is because of the issue that came about from them serving the country. But those issues are things that create overcrowding. Avoiding litigation, we are employees legally liable for their own actions. Uh, we are in a litigious society, which means people file lawsuits for looking at you funny. But the point of the matter is that what we do is we have a screening process to try to minimize it if possible. You as a person who work in a facility, Bryce, totally understand that the processes and procedures that they give you to follow does not guarantee that you will not end up in litigation. What it does do is it minimizes the possibility, and it also further um, prepares success for the facility and the individuals who are performing the services, as opposed to um, big money that's paid out by the state. Staff performance, we already talked about that. Expense of staff training, it is costly, but policies. But again, remember what I said. You're helping a whole lot by going to school. I'm sure that as you have been 4 times for PAT searches. When you mean you say you have been 4 times for PAT searches? Are you? Oh. Yeah, saying that you touched somebody improperly, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That. But as you do this job, that you are given certain guidelines and instructions that you must follow those regulations to try to minimize it. But yeah, you can't eliminate it, but you can minimize it. But anyway, the training aspect of it, I'm sure that your employer appreciates the fact that you're in school uh, to obtain a degree. And it's also going to probably ultimately result in uh, positive direction for your future and in terms of benefits, promotions, and ultimately compensation on a financial level. Program evaluation, required jail programs, quality of programs. We kind of talked about that already. So let's keep on keep on moving. Um, oh, I'm skipping that because we're talking about this. And so And so again, dealing with the organizational structure, the warden, the duties, all these different things that you deal with. HR, human resources, that's the thing that you deal with in every other job for your employees, for the people that are working there. And when something goes wrong in the facility, um, who usually is named in either if it's a lawsuit or something, if the person who's the officer that's involved or the party involved, and then the warden. The warden is always listed because the warden is like the coach on the team. And when the team doesn't do well, the warden catches it. Of course, that trickles down to the individuals who hold those various offices that we talked about, levels. The chain of command, we already kind of have dealt with that. Uh, and so, um, regard to counselor, the pay and hours and stuff like that, which again, we've kind of addressed that. Um, role, the defendants ultimately is to release the individuals and provide adequate programming so that they can reintegrate. And those kind of things. Try to eliminate barriers, and that's by providing services. Okay, so we're going to jump to the next one. Okay, so when offenders release, they have a plan that's given to them, and you have to make sure that they're ready for release at that time. There are possibilities of suits that take place. The conditions of release are not to be too egregious. And the key thing is you should be aware that every condition that usually that is provided for release is not for punishment or for punitive, but should be for better preparation of that individual to reintegrate. Moving right along, because we got a lot of stuff here, is so the key thing is, as it says here, that the release barriers, there's a lot of problems, and there's no real, as they say, consensus. I would say, quite honestly, dealing with it, you take it on a case by case basis, dealing with individuals where they are. And you got to make sure that you satisfy the criminogenic issues here, like dealing with relationships and support, some friends and peers, attitudes, personality, employment, substance abuse, leisure. What we talked about that already. And then the nine is people need a place to go to. And then they need certain legal documents, birth certificates. They need to have those, try to help them to set up bank accounts, deal with transportation, and above all things, medication and some form of medical insurance to deal with the issues, because once they leave that facility, then they're going to, most of them probably end up with Medicaid for some form of medical insurance. So now, so as it says here, and we've already talked about that, is when you're moving from prison to community, the, the key thing is, and goal is, to minimize uh, or eliminate possible recidivism. And as I said already, the philosophy, I already said this, effective transition to relief begins at intake. That's what I was talking about earlier. And all correctional staff are seen as effective parties to intervene around offender change. In other words, every one of you guys who work in this area will see that your role is to prepare or operate with TPC, transition from prison to community. In that formula of doing that, there should be no recidivism or a minimum amount. Okay. And so what you should be aware of is what does work, what meets the needs of individuals, what doesn't work. And it says here that target thinking works. And that's, yeah, because you have a goal on getting to the core of the problem that brought the person there in the first place. Sanctions and punishment, as we already have discussed, that gets to the prison, the penal aspects of it. It really doesn't help the individual much because, as we say already, deterrence is a kind of like an ancient approach to dealing with stopping people from committing crimes. Not even the death penalty deters individuals. The only person that might deter is that person who is ultimately, if they're executed, but it doesn't stop people from committing crimes. So what makes a difference? We already talked about this. Firm, but fair and consistent. Firm, fair, and consistent. Communication skills, that's why we remember at the beginning of this course, we talked about our transferable skills, and one of them was communication. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Communication is the number one thing, because nothing else matters if you can't connect with the offender. That is, well, that's just like if you're trying to make a phone call to somebody and they don't answer, and you don't have capacity to leave a voicemail, you can't text them, so you're not connecting. So yes, absolutely, absolutely. But good communication skills, that's what we talk about, enable individuals to be able to communicate successfully. Communication is not attempting to communicate. Communication is sending out a message and getting a response. But you have to reach the individual uh, And then guess what else? You stopped the riot within 4 hours last week because of communication. Sure, we use it all the time in law enforcement. Our vocals. I use it in as a lawyer. But what I was going to say is this: is that dealing with communication skills with individuals, you cannot be good at anything without good communication skills, but especially I can't be good as a professor without good communication skills, and neither can you as a corrections officer or anyone working in that facility. Remember what your goal is. As I said earlier, to be a servant, but you must be able to get into that individual. And there's another key thing that goes with communication: the trust. The trust. The inmates have to be able to trust you, respect you. But if they don't trust you, sometimes you're not able to find out the things that really you need to help that individual. And trust is essential in terms of that. All right. Okay, let's move right along. So I'm going to skip this. Yep. So um, uh, one of the things that you're dealing with TPC is, and I was listening to what the lady was saying. I agree with her. Is that, and when you listen to the valid risk need analysis, there's no um, rubric or one size fits all in terms of dealing with this. You have to deal with it on an individual basis. However, though, there are certain guidelines, as we just talked about a few minutes ago, that you must um, um, provide in order to be able to be successful with that. So, so I'm going to skip over some of this. Okay, now we're going to conclude this section dealing with this. All staff, notice this, are, as it says, instrumental in enhancing offender motivation to change. I said that earlier. Every interaction with an offender is an opportunity to effectuate change. We talked about that. Offenders differ in what they need to change. I said that because that's why you customize the plan for that individual. There's no cookie cutter things that you deal with. Uh, um, Turning the ship, hiring the right people. Yeah, that's the point. Uh, there are some people who originally were in corrections because of the fact that they thought that they would have, whoa, I'm putting you out of class because you're taking my words. Yes, we have a thing that we tell people it's power. But what we talk about, yeah, hide behind the badge. You all ever heard about the John Wayne syndrome? If anybody knows how John Wayne was as a cowboy, he was always I got this. And then also you have law enforcement people and corrections people who hide behind that badge. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And so the badge is well, we call it, you call it little man problems. We call it a Napoleonic complex. If anybody studied on Napoleon, Napoleon was a short dude, but he always wanted to run stuff. You know, he always wanted to influence people by using his power and his status and his position. So you're on it already, and that's it. And that's counterproductive. that's counterproductive. So cultivate a culture of collaboration and communication. We've kind of talked about that already. Comprehensive case planning, expanding effective intervention strategies. Again, the key is to be able to serve individuals. You want to be able to provide them what they need where they are as well. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to go back to down here. And we kind of already have touched TPC, and we know what it stands for. And the key thing is, first you have to do is assess the situation, um, and looking at that from this dealing with the R&R model, and operating on knowing um, what you need to do, how you're going to achieve the success. You got individuals who are, as they say, you got to find out the stuff about them that got them there, their history of how antisocial, personality pattern problems, antisocial attitudes, values, and beliefs, antisocial associations, peers, friends. People oftentimes find themselves influenced by their peers, and we always say that you end up operating on the basis of who you hang with. Okay. Uh, the utility utilizing the seamless case plan is that moves from when the offender is in prison. You, like I said, from day one, you begin to move them and begin operating with preparing your structural plans and cases, focusing on the big four with attention to criminal thinking and skill deficits that we talked about already, but always subject to change. Being able to operate on that basis, like I said, it's not um, black and white. Evidence-based research shown to be effective in reducing criminal behavior. And so the things that you need to do are some of the things that we've talked about already. Deal with the skills, develop the skills of individuals, um, operating on the basis of who your audience is, the gender, what their level of functioning are, and then as I said already, we already kind of talked about this. It says implement it with integrity. Remember, I talked about dealing with truth and those kinds of things. Collaborating with stakeholders, deal with the who's involved, whose interests are involved, the family of those individuals, preparing individuals to mentor individuals, those peers that will have influence on individuals. And it's correct. Corrections can't do this alone. It takes the family involved, faith-based communities. We have our role in terms of dealing with people from that perspective, as well as treatment, understand R&R and utilizing in setting up programs. And then the final thing is complications. And here they are laid out pretty much like what we've already been talking about. Lack of understanding of treatment as critical to security. You got to understand security. You got to understand what's needed to deal with the issue. How do you do it? And then it says philosophies change for many prison employees. Who thinks that this word correction officer, case managers, uh, POs, parole officers, probation officers, changes in staff training, and then of course we already talked about the fact that funding is also a challenge and a barrier. And finally, form relationships with partners outside the community, organizations, as I said, faith-based organizations, and even some that are not faith-based organizations, just general community um, organizations to provide uh, services and programs to meet the needs of individuals when they are released. Okay, so that's dealing with TPC, getting them ready for it. Okay, so the final thing here is, and we pretty much covered everything here, is to get ready for that quiz. You do this. This is where I'm going to ask you some questions to deal with this quiz. So match the following items with their descriptions. Boundary violations. Boundary violations. What are boundary violations? Anybody? Okay, how about the ones you do know? What about chain of command? Anybody? Hmm. Yeah, okay. I kind of tipped that one, didn't I? How about the other two? What span of control? And then, of course, this one. Oh, you think you think that's boundaries, or which one do you think? Behavior that blurs, minimizes, disrupts the social service, boundary violation. Behavior that blurs go where? Behavior that blurs go with boundaries. Okay, that means then the last one. Let's see how smart you guys are. Yep, you got it. And those are the kinds of things that you should be able to run across in terms of preparing for the quiz. So I'm going to get out of that because we got, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Got to go back. Okay, let's go back to, let's go back to the, what I was sharing. Okay, I got to put it back up because I closed it out. Give me a minute. I got to get back in. Give me a minute. Like learn. Okay. You can't see what I'm looking at anyway until I share it. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so now let's go back into here and then I'll share it. I know because I haven't done this yet. I know that. That's why I said you couldn't see what I was looking at. I didn't want you to really see it. Okay, so let's go back down to here and we're dealing with the lesson content. So I'm saying that when you get down here, just make sure that you take the time to do that and as it prepares you for the exam. Okay. So now I want to go before I give you the key because I want you to be prepared for next week. And this will be real quick. Let's look at the assignments for next week. And what you'll see, your discussion is your peer feedback. And you'll go back and you'll look at this. And then there's your quiz. That's it. That's what you got next week. So you got discussion post and you have that. So there's no rubric that we're dealing with. All right. So and it's a wrap up where you deal with the topic is the future of corrections and the direction that you see it going in, the implementation of evidence-based practices and corrections, the primary challenges, and so you're going to take a look at this information here. Make sure you go through, and then you'll look at some of these charts, corrections and how it is changing. We've kind of talked about this all the way through, dealing with the race and ethnicity and corrections, and then the future and the direction that you see it going there, and then your vocabulary. You want to make sure you do this to prepare for the exam. Any questions about week 6? It's like the icing on the cake. No questions? Okay. So now I'm going to ask you what I usually ask you. I'm leaving, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to try to think what you think that the topic is going to be today. Anybody else? Okay, I won't belabor it. He got it. It's TPC, but I don't want the letters. I want you to tell me what TPC stand for. And I'm not going to say it because we already talked about this in the lecture. So you're going to have to give me what TPC is in order to get your points. That's it. Any questions? Questions? Nobody? Okay. Well, I want to say I hope that you've enjoyed this class. It was quick. I hope you learned information from the beginning when you started in here, and that hopefully that um, you will end up um, some of you will end up as correction officers like uh, Bryce already is, and people like Bryce would elevate themselves into a higher level and go from. Some people use corrections as another understanding for other areas of criminal justice and end up in law enforcement, which is fine because then you understand what happens after law enforcement uh, has dealt with its part, dealing with when the courts and so forth. Some of you will end up becoming probation officers, or finding yourselves parole officers in those areas as well. So, so he said, "Don't do it." That's not nice. You don't want to discourage these people. My kiddo is sick. Oh, okay. All right, Jenna. I hope that he feels better, and everybody's stuck staying at home. So you got to take care of that kind of thing. Let's see what he says. In our state, you have to have 6 months of corrections before getting in patrol. Okay, so it's important. All right, guys, I'm going to say good night again. I wish you the best. I look forward to seeing some of you in some of my other classes. Next term, I will be starting in T2. I will be teaching I will continue with 11-week class I have now. And in place of this, and in my constitutional law class that ends, I will be teaching starting Wednesday the 13th, introduction to criminal law, J115, and then also drugs and crime, which is a whole very interesting course that I get into the details about the relationship between the two. So with that, don't worry. We're still working on getting your assignments completed. We just yesterday was a tough day for me. I already told you that because we uh, had the service for my brother and dealing with that whole situation. So, but I appreciate you guys being patient and so forth. But I'm working on getting week 3 completed this week, and then also working over the weekend to get week 4 completed, because uh, week 5 and 6 I will end up having to do by the end of next week to have your final grades in. All right, so you know what to do if you need to reach me. So you guys stay safe. Again, it's been a pleasure, and looking forward to seeing you guys in some of my classes further down the road. The final thing I will say, please remember week 5, that last column in your rubric. You want to satisfy those requirements. Okay, good night.